The alien marketplace was alive with sound, bright colors flashing from banners and laughter echoing through the crowd. At the center stood a human, calm and steady. His name was Daniel, a traveler who had found himself far from home. He was surrounded by dozens of aliens who looked at him with smirks and disbelief. Among them stood a woman unlike the rest. She was tall, her skin faintly glowing in shades of silver and blue. Her hair shimmered like glass under the twin suns. Her eyes locked onto the human with a mix of challenge and curiosity. She was called Lysera, known across her world for beauty, pride, and strength. "You humans cannot be active all the time," Lysera declared loudly, her voice carrying across the square. "Your kind grows weak. Your kind rests too much. My people can go on for days without sleep, without food, without stopping. You are fragile, soft creatures." The crowd roared with laughter. Their voices rose in agreement, mocking the humans standing in their midst. Daniel did not flinch. His lips curled into a faint smile. He studied Lysera with quiet eyes. "And yet," he said softly, "you dared me to prove you wrong." The marketplace went silent for a moment. Aliens leaned forward, eager for drama. Lysera tilted her head, her shimmering hair brushing against her shoulder. She smirked and folded her arms across her chest. "Yes, prove it, human," she said. "Show us that your kind can endure what mine can. Show us that you are not weak. I dare you." Her words hung heavy in the air. The challenge was clear. The alien people loved contests, and her dare had stirred excitement in every heart. Daniel felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes pressing down on him. But inside he was calm in a way that only a human could be when faced with doubt. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. Lysera's smile widened. She stepped closer, her presence most glowing with pride. "Tomorrow, we begin the trials, a series of tasks to test strength, speed, and endurance. You must last through them, without falling, without stopping, fail, and you will admit that your kind is weaker than mine. Succeed, and—" She paused, her eyes narrowing with amusement. "Then perhaps I will admit that I was wrong about humans." The crowd gasped. The idea of Lysera admitting defeat was unthinkable, yet the thought filled them with excitement. A storm of voices rose around Daniel, half cheering, half laughing. Daniel only nodded. His calmness irritated some, confused others. He should have looked nervous. He should have been afraid. But instead, he smiled. "Then I accept," he said. Lysera leaned closer, her voice lowering, almost whispering but still sharp enough for the crowd to hear. "Do not think this will be easy, human. My people are bred for this. My people never stop. We will see how long you last before you collapse." Her words were meant to crush him, but Daniel's eyes did not waver. He had endured storms, hunger, and battles back on Earth. He knew something Lysera and her people did not understand. Humans could not stay active every moment, but humans carried something deeper. The ability to push beyond limits when it mattered most. The crowd erupted once more, betting and shouting. Already the marketplace buzzed with excitement for tomorrow's trials. Aliens whispered of the human's foolishness. Others laughed at the idea of him lasting even one test. But Lysera kept her gaze on Daniel. Something in his eyes unsettled her. Something told her this human was not like the others she had seen. Daniel turned away at last, walking calmly through the crowd, his steps slow but steady. The aliens parted reluctantly, muttering and mocking, but Lysera's smirk faded as she watched him go. A thought whispered in the back of her mind. "Oh!" And if he really could prove her wrong. The next morning the alien city was alive again. The news of the dare had spread overnight, and now the entire plaza buzzed with excitement. Everyone wanted to see how far the human would last. Everyone wanted to see him fail. Daniel walked calmly to the great training grounds. His steps were steady, his eyes sharp. He knew they were all watching him. He could feel the weight of their stares, but he refused to show fear. The training grounds stretched across a wide valley. Towers of stone rose high with ropes and bridges between them. Rivers cut through the middle, fast and dangerous. Huge walls of ice and jagged rock lined the edges. It was no playground. It was a battlefield of endurance. Lysera stood waiting. Her silver blue skin gleamed under the twin suns. Her hair caught the light like crystal. She smiled as the human approached. "Welcome, Daniel. This is where my people train from childhood. Here we learn never to stop, never to rest. Here is where you will fail. Her words drew laughter from the crowd of aliens gathered around. They filled the stands and the cliffs, their voices echoing in the open air. Some shouted for Lysera, others mocked the human, but Daniel stayed quiet. His gaze moved slowly over the obstacles, measuring every distance, every climb, every danger. Lysera lifted her arm, signaling to the alien overseers. "The first test will begin," she said. "Run the ground from end to end, cross the rivers, climb the towers, leap the bridges. Show us if your weak human legs can last even one course." Daniel nodded. He stepped forward onto the dirt path, his heart beat steady. He knew he was not the fastest, not the strongest, but humans carried something different, he whispered to himself. Step by step, a horn sounded. The challenge began. Daniel sprinted forward. The crowd erupted in cheers and laughter, expecting to see him stumble. The first river roared ahead. Aliens dived into it with ease, their bodies cutting through the current like blades. Daniel plunged in after them. The water was ice cold, his muscles burned, but he forced his arms to move, his legs to kick. He reached the other side and pulled himself up. Lysera watched with a smirk. Her people crossed without slowing, but the human dragged himself up, shaking the water from his hair, and continued without pause. She frowned slightly. Next came the stone tower, slick with moss. Aliens climbed like spiders, their glowing fingers gripping cracks. Daniel pressed his hands to the stone, pulling himself up 1 inch at a time. His arms ached, his fingers slipped. The crowd jeered, shouting that he would fall, but he did not let go. He pushed higher, slow but steady. Halfway up, his foot slipped and the crowd gasped. His body swung, but his grip held. He gritted his teeth, his face strained, and with a roar, he pulled himself back to the wall. Inch by inch he climbed until he reached the top. He stood there, chest heaving, but he raised his fist for all to see. The crowd fell into silence for a moment. Even Lysera's smile faltered, but she quickly called out, "Not bad, human, but you are sweating already. You will not last long." Daniel said nothing. He leapt onto the narrow bridge of ropes. His balance wavered as the wind pushed him. Aliens darted across with ease. He walked step by step, the ropes swaying. His heart pounded, his hands tight on the cords. Yet he crossed. By the time he reached the final stretch of the course, his chest burned, his legs screamed for rest. Sweat covered him, but his eyes stayed sharp. He pushed through the last sprint and collapsed at the finish line. The aliens cheered, not for him but for his failure. Lysera walked toward him, her steps graceful. "You are finished already, human," she said. Her voice carried pride. But Daniel raised his head, his eyes locked on hers. His chest heaved as he whispered, "Not finished, just starting." The sun climbed higher in the alien sky, spilling its golden light across the wide training ground. The first challenge had ended, but for Daniel, it was only the beginning. He stood at the edge of the field, catching his breath, while the alien crowd roared with excitement. Some shouted that he would collapse before the next test. Others laughed and pointed, already certain of his defeat. Lysera stepped forward, her presence commanding silence. Her crystal-like hair shimmered in the light, her voice sharp and strong. "You passed the course, but do not be proud. That was only the warm-up. Now the real first test begins." A series of obstacles shifted before them, metal walls rising from the ground, platforms tilting and rotating. The arena itself changed shape, built by alien machines to test both body and mind. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he studied the moving walls, the shifting floor, and the rising smoke. It was a battlefield of balance and endurance. Lysera pointed toward the maze. "Enter, human. Run through until the end. My people can finish this without rest. Show us if you can even reach the halfway point." The crowd cheered, the horn sounded, and Daniel sprinted forward. The ground beneath him tilted sharply, throwing him off balance. He stumbled but caught himself. His arms swung wide as he pushed forward. Each step carried him into deeper chaos. Metal walls slid together, closing like jaws. He dashed between them, slipping through the narrow gap as they clanged shut behind him. Sparks flew, the sound echoing across the arena. The aliens gasped, many expecting him to be crushed. But Daniel kept moving, his heart pounding, his body straining. At one turn, fire burst from the ground. Aliens laughed, knowing how unprepared a human would be. Daniel jumped back, the heat searing his skin. He took a deep breath, waited for the rhythm of the flames, and darted. Through imperfect timing, the crowd's laughter turned into silence for a heartbeat. Lysera leaned forward, her arms crossed. Her smirk faded into something else, curiosity. She watched the human carefully. Her people relied on strength and endless stamina, but this human used patience, timing, and willpower. He studied every danger and adapted. Halfway through the maze, Daniel's legs shook, his breath came heavy, sweat streamed down his face. The alien warriors who attempted the same course barely slowed, but the human refused to stop. He forced his body forward, step by step. One final obstacle blocked the path, an enormous wall that seemed impossible to climb. The surface was slick metal, smooth and cold. No rope, no cracks. The crowd erupted in laughter. Certain this was the end. Daniel stared at the wall. His chest heaved, his body screamed for rest. He pressed his palms against the cold surface. His muscles trembled. For a moment, it seemed hopeless. But then he dropped low, scanned the edge, and found a narrow beam running along the side. Small, sharp, but just enough. He leapt, grabbing the thin beam. His fingers dug into the sharp edge. Pain split through his hands, but he did not let go. Inch by inch, he pulled himself upward. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Aliens who had mocked him now leaned forward in disbelief. Lysera's lips parted slightly, her sharp words lost for a moment. With one last roar, Daniel dragged himself over the wall and collapsed on the other side. His arms shook, blood from his hands staining the dirt. But he had crossed. The horn sounded. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some booed, others cheered. All of them were stunned. Lysera stepped closer, her eyes locked on him. She spoke slowly, her voice no longer mocking. You should not have been able to do that, yet you did, human. What drives you? Daniel lifted his head, his eyes filled with fire. His voice came out rough but steady. Humans do not stop just because we are told to. The suns of the alien world sank behind the horizon. The sky turned violet, then dark blue, and the stars began to burn above the city. The training ground was not silent, however. Torches lit the field, and the crowd remained, eager to watch the human struggle continue. Daniel sat on the edge of the field, his body aching. His hands were raw from the climb. His breath came in sharp bursts. He wanted to rest. His muscles demanded it. But he knew the dare was not over. He knew Lysera would not allow him a pause. Lysera stepped forward, her glowing skin catching the firelight. Her silver blue hair shimmered as she looked down at him. Her voice carried through the night air. The true test begins when the suns are gone, human. This is when most creatures weaken. But my people remain active. We can run, climb, and fight until dawn without slowing. Can you? The crowd laughed and shouted in agreement. Aliens stomped their feet and called out for the night trial to begin. Daniel rose slowly to his feet, his chest heavy with exhaustion, his legs stiff but his eyes steady. He gave no answer. He simply nodded. The horn sounded, and the next trial began. The night course spread out before him, marked with shadow and fire. High towers stood in darkness. Ropes swayed in the cold wind. Pits of sand and jagged stones stretched in every direction. It was a battlefield designed to break the will. Daniel ran forward. His boots crunched on the gravel. His body felt heavier than before. Each step was a war, yet he refused to stop. His arms swung, his breath came rough, his eyes fixed on the flickering lights ahead. At the first rope climb, the cold bit into his skin. Aliens moved past him with speed, laughing as they climbed. Daniel's hands shook. His grip almost failed, but he tightened his jaw and pulled upward. His shoulders burned, his arms screamed. Still he rose, inch by inch, until he reached the top. Lysera's eyes narrowed. She had expected him to fall. She had expected him to collapse at night like any weak creature. Instead, she saw him stand taller, even in pain. A strange feeling stirred inside her. Not annoyance, not mockery, but something closer to respect. Hours passed. The night grew colder. The crowd thinned, but many remained, curious to see how long the human would last. Daniel stumbled more often now. His knees buckled, his breath shallow. His body wanted nothing more than to lie down and sleep. But each time he faltered, he whispered to himself, "One more step." The alien beauty watched, arms folded. Her heart beat faster than she wished. She told herself it was only interest in the dare, yet she could not deny it. Something about the human unsettled her pride. Near midnight, Daniel reached the pit of sand. His feet sank with every step. The cold wind cut across the field. His body trembled, his vision blurred. He fell once, twice, but each time he pushed back to his feet. His voice cracked as he growled, "Not finished." When he finally dragged himself out of the sand, the crowd erupted. Some laughed, others shouted in disbelief, a few even cheered, but all eyes were on him. Daniel stood shaking, his body nearly broken, yet his spirit unyielding. Lysera stepped closer, her gaze locked on him, her voice softened, though the crowd could still hear. "Why do you continue, human? You could stop, you could rest. No one would shame you, yet you fight the night itself." Daniel lifted his head, his face pale in the torchlight, his lips curled into a weak smile. "Because humans don't stop when the dark comes, we endure it." For the first time, Lysera had no reply. Her heart thudded in her chest, and she turned away quickly, hiding the flicker of doubt in her eyes. The long night was not yet over, but already she realized. The human was more than she had dared to believe. The first rays of dawn touched the alien world. The sky glowed with pale silver as the twin suns rose. The crowd that had stayed through the long night stirred with restless energy. They had witnessed the human survive the dark hours, and still he stood, bruised and trembling, but alive. Daniel's body ached with every movement. His arms burned, his legs heavy as stone, his lips cracked, his skin pale, yet in his eyes there was no surrender. He stood quietly, waiting. His chest rose and fell in slow, steady rhythm. Lysera walked into the field. Her presence shone brighter than the morning light. Her silver-blue skin gleamed. Her crystal hair shimmered. Her sharp gaze locked onto Daniel. "You survived the night," she said, her voice calm but edged with pride. "But you are broken. This is where your trial ends." Daniel's faint smile returned. He shook his head. "Not broken," he whispered. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Not finished." The crowd erupted in noise. Some shouted in disbelief, others laughed. A few had begun to feel uneasy. The human should have collapsed long ago. He should have begged for mercy, yet he refused. Lysera lifted her hand and signaled to the overseers. A new challenge rose from the ground. Towers of jagged ice formed in the center of the arena. Frost spread across the floor, and the air grew colder. "Climb," Lysera commanded. "Show us if your fragile body can endure more." Daniel stepped forward. His boots crunched on the frost. His breath turned to mist in the freezing air. He placed his hand against the ice wall. His skin burned from the cold. He gritted his teeth and began to climb. The surface was slick, sharp, and merciless. Each step sent pain through his body. His fingers bled as he dug them into cracks. His arms shook violently, yet he climbed higher inch by inch. His breath came heavy, his vision blurred, but he did not stop. Aliens in the crowd whispered now, no longer just mocking. Some were stunned, others confused. A few even leaned forward with admiration. Lysera crossed her arms, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her sharp eyes followed every move. Something inside her twisted. Halfway up, Daniel's hand slipped. His body dangled over the frost. Gasps filled the air. A fall from this height would break him. The crowd roared for his failure. Lysera's heart pounded harder than she wished. But Daniel roared and slammed his hand back into the ice. His arm burned, his grip cut deeper, and he pulled himself upward. At the peak, his body swayed, his chest heaved, his lips trembled with exhaustion. Still, he raised his hand high, showing he had conquered the tower. A silence spread across the training ground. Lysera stepped forward, her voice sharp though softer than before. "Why? Why do you keep pushing, human? What drives you past your limit?" Daniel turned his head, his eyes locked onto hers. "Because limits," he whispered, "are only walls. Humans climb walls." The words struck like thunder. For the first time, the alien beauty had no mocking reply. Her smirk faltered, replaced with something else, an emotion she had never shown in front of her people. A hint of respect. Daniel climbed down slowly, nearly collapsing when his boots touched the ground. He leaned against the ice wall, shaking, his hands bleeding, his body trembling. Yet his eyes were alive, filled with quiet fire. The crowd could not deny it anymore. This human was different. Not endless stamina, not alien endurance, but something deeper, something they had never seen before. Lysera turned away, hiding her thoughts, but in her chest she felt it, a truth she could no longer ignore. This human carried a hidden strength her people had never understood, and it terrified her. The training ground was quiet after the ice climb. The crowd no longer laughed as loudly. They whispered among themselves, unsure of what they were witnessing. The human had pushed through every challenge. His body was battered, but his will was unbroken. Daniel stood in the middle of the field, swaying on his feet. His hands were torn and bleeding, his arms heavy. His chest rose and fell in sharp bursts. He wanted to lie down, to rest, but he knew the dare was not finished. He knew Lysera would demand more. Lysera stepped closer, her silver blue eyes fixed on him. Her crystal hair caught the morning light. She lifted her chin with pride. "One more test," she said. "If you can stand after this, then I will admit humans are not weak." The crowd roared, excited once more. The overseers moved the ground, shifting the arena into a circle. At its center stood a massive stone, round and smooth, heavier than anything Daniel had seen before. Aliens gasped with excitement, for they knew this task. It was the trial of the boulder. Lysera pointed, her voice strong. "Move it, human. Push it across the circle. If you can, you may keep your pride. If not, then your strength is nothing." Daniel looked at the stone. His arms trembled, his legs weak. His mind screamed at him to give up, to stop before his body broke. But something deeper rose in his chest, a fire that refused to die. He walked toward the boulder, every step heavy. The crowd leaned forward, waiting. He pressed his hands against the cold surface. His muscles screamed, his breath caught. He pushed, but the boulder did not move. Laughter erupted from the stands. Aliens shouted that this was his end. But Daniel gritted his teeth, his face red with strain, his body shaking. He pushed again, harder. His arms burned, his back screamed, his knees bent as if they would snap. Yet the stone shuddered, just slightly. The otter stopped. Silence spread for a moment. Daniel roared, a sound that echoed across the training ground. He pushed with everything inside him. The boulder scraped forward an inch, then another. His vision blurred, his breath ragged. Still he pushed. Finally, his legs gave out. His body collapsed to the ground. He lay there gasping, unable to rise. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others mocking. They shouted that the human had failed, that he could move no further. Lysera stepped forward, her eyes fixed on him, her lips curved into a smirk. "You are finished, human. Your body has broken. Admit it. You cannot go on." But Daniel lifted his head, his face pale, sweat dripping, his voice cracked but steady. "I am not finished. I am only resting." The crowd fell silent again. The words carried a weight none could deny. Lysera froze, her smirk fading. She had expected him to surrender, to admit defeat, yet even collapsed on the ground, his spirit burned stronger than any warrior she had known. Slowly, Daniel placed his hands on the dirt. His arms trembled as he pushed himself up. His body shook violently, his chest heaved, but inch by inch he rose to his knees, then to his feet. His eyes locked on the boulder once more. The crowd gasped. They had never seen such madness, such determination. Lysera's heart pounded, her pride clashing with something new, something unfamiliar. Daniel placed his hands back on the stone, his voice low but filled with fire. "I said I would show you, and I will." The suns climbed higher, the arena glowed, and the human, though broken, stood again before the impossible. The air around the arena felt heavy. The alien crowd was restless, whispering among themselves. They had seen the human collapse. They had seen him rise again. Something about it unsettled them. They no longer laughed so easily. Daniel stood before the massive boulder once more. His body trembled. His hands were raw, blood streaking down his arms. His knees shook under his own weight, but his eyes burned with quiet fire. He pressed his palms flat against the stone and closed his eyes. For a moment, he was silent. Lysera watched closely. Her silver blue skin shimmered in the sunlight. Her sharp eyes studied him with a mixture of pride and disbelief. She wanted him to fail. She wanted her words to be right. But deep inside, she wanted to see if he could truly do the impossible. The crowd erupted in shouts as Daniel pushed again, his arms strained, his back bent, his face twisted in pain. At first, the stone did not move. It stood like a mountain, unyielding. The aliens mocked him, shouting that it was hopeless, that even their strongest warriors could barely shift it. But Daniel's roar cut through their voices, a raw sound filled with every ounce of strength left in him. The boulder trembled. It scraped across the ground with a grinding sound, inch by inch. It began to move. The crowd fell silent, all eyes locked on him. The human's body shook violently, his breath ragged, his legs quivered as if they would snap, but still he pushed. The stone slid forward, slow but steady, leaving a deep trail in the dirt. Lysera's lips parted in shock. Her chest rose quickly as she fought to hide the pounding of her heart. Never before had she seen such determination, such refusal to surrender. It was madness, but it was also power. Daniel's vision blurred. He could barely see the stone in front of him. His ears rang. His body screamed to stop, to rest. But he remembered the Doa. He remembered her words. He remembered every laugh and every doubt. And he kept pushing. Another inch, another scrape. Sweat poured from his face. His arms shook. His knees buckled. His voice broke into harsh gasps. Still he leaned forward, pressing everything he was into the stone. His spirit carried what his body no longer could. Finally, with one last roar, Daniel shoved the boulder across the marked line in the circle. His body collapsed against it. His arms fell limp. His chest heaved. He had done it. For a moment, silence filled the arena. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was Daniel's harsh breathing. Then the crowd erupted. Not in laughter, not in mockery, but in stunned cries of disbelief. Lysera stepped forward slowly. Her eyes locked on him. Her voice softer than before. You moved it, human. No one believed you could, yet you did. Daniel raised his head, his face pale, his lips cracked, his voice weak but steady. You said humans cannot be active all the time. You are right. But when it matters, we give everything, even when nothing is left. The words struck deeper than any challenge. The crowd was silent again. Many lowered their eyes, unable to deny the truth they had seen. Lysera stood frozen. For the first time in her life, she felt her pride falter. She had seen power. She had seen strength. But this was something more, something her people did not understand. Daniel leaned back against the boulder. His chest rose and fell, his body shaking. He whispered once more, barely loud enough for anyone to hear, "Not finished." Lysera turned away, hiding the strange storm inside her heart. She clenched her fists, struggling between pride and respect. She knew the next test would decide everything. But she also knew one truth she could not escape. This human was impossible. The arena was still. The crowd that once laughed now stood in silence, watching the human lying in the dust. Daniel's body didn't move. His arms lay at his sides, his chest slowly rising and falling. Lysera stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had called him weak, soft, foolish. Yet now she felt something strange, shame, not for him, but for herself. The boulder sat at the far edge of the arena, proof that the human had done the impossible. No one from her kind had ever moved it more than a few inches. Some had tried, all had failed. But Daniel, bleeding and broken, had succeeded. She took a slow step toward him. Her voice was quieter than before. Why human? Why keep going when your body begged you to stop? Daniel opened his eyes. His lips were dry, his voice rough but calm. Because when someone tells us we can't, we have to try harder. His answer hit her like a strike to the chest. Lysera had trained her whole life, had competed in battles and trials, but her strength came from knowing she would win. She had never continued when failure seemed certain. She looked around at the crowd. They still watched in stunned silence. Their pride had been shaken. Their idea of humans had changed in one night. Daniel slowly pushed himself up to sit. His arms trembled. His back bent, but he lifted his head. He looked not just at Lysera, but at the aliens around them. You think strength is only in the body, he said, but strength is also here. He tapped his temple. And here, he placed a hand over his heart. Some aliens frowned. Some lowered their eyes. Others began to nod quietly. Lysera felt her jaw tighten. For the first time, she understood. His strength wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something that couldn't be measured in muscle or speed. She stepped closer and knelt beside him, her voice softer now. You changed something here, human. You made them see differently. You made me see differently. Daniel looked at her with tired eyes. Not just for them, he whispered. For you too. Her heart skipped. She didn't answer right away. She couldn't. Her mind raced with emotions she didn't want to admit. She had mocked him, challenged him, dared him. But now she felt respect. Maybe more than that. The crowd began to move again, slowly, quietly. Some aliens approached Daniel, offering water. Others simply watched with new eyes. No longer seeing him as weak, Lysera stood and turned to the gathering crowd. "He came as a stranger," she said aloud. "But he fought like one of us. No, he fought harder than us." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the aliens. The energy had changed. The crowd no longer saw a broken outsider. They saw a warrior. Daniel lowered his head again, letting the moment pass. He wasn't there for praise. He hadn't done it for glory. He had done it to prove something, not just to them, but to himself. Lysera looked back at him once more, her voice low so only he could hear. "Tomorrow, I will tell them you won the dare." Daniel didn't smile. He simply nodded. The turning point had come. Not just in the challenge, but in hearts. Something between them had shifted, and neither of them could deny it. The alien crowd gathered again the next day. Their voices carried through the morning air. The city had not stopped speaking of the humans' trials. Every corner whispered of the man who had moved the boulder. Every child repeated his roar as he pushed the impossible. But now, all waited to see if he could survive the final test. Daniel stood once more at the center of the arena. His body still bore the scars of the last days, his arms wrapped in cloth, his steps heavy, his face pale but his eyes clear. He had not come to back away, he had come to finish what he started. Lysera approached, her silver-blue form shining like a blade under the light of the twin suns. Her voice rang across the field. "The time has come, human. One last trial will decide everything. If you succeed, no one will doubt your people again. If you fail, then your strength means nothing." The crowd roared, eager for the final spectacle. The ground rumbled as the overseers prepared the challenge. At the edge of the arena, massive gates opened. Beyond them stretched a vast wilderness, thick forests, jagged cliffs, rivers running wild, a place where only the strongest of her kind dared to go. Lysera pointed toward the wild. 3 days, she said. 3 days in the wilderness, alone, no tools, no rest. Survive until you return, fail, and the dare is mine. Daniel's lips curved in a faint smile. He gave no long speech. He simply nodded and walked toward the gate. His footsteps echoed in the silence. The crowd parted like waves, watching him disappear into the forest. The first hours were cruel. The forest floor was uneven, roots and stones cut into his boots. Strange alien insects buzzed, and the air was thick and damp. Daniel's stomach growled, hunger gnawed at him, but he forced himself onward. At night the cold returned, sharper than the day before. He built no fire, for he had no tools. Instead, he curled under a fallen tree, listening to the strange calls of alien beasts in the distance. His body shook from the chill, but he whispered to himself, "One more night." Lysera could not help herself. She followed in secret, hidden among the shadows. Her pride had drawn her here, but curiosity kept her close. She watched him stumble, watched him bleed from cuts on his arms, watched him collapse against a tree only to rise again. Each time he whispered to himself, as if reminding his body that he would not stop. By the second day, his body was weaker, his lips cracked, his legs trembling, yet he moved with purpose. He found wild fruit, bitter and strange, but enough to quiet his hunger. He tore strips of bark to wrap his wounds. He adapted. He survived. Lysera's eyes widened as she watched. Her people were stronger, faster, born with endurance, but none of them had this will to keep moving when the body was already broken. She felt her heart twist with every step he took, torn between pride for her people and admiration for him. The third day came. Daniel's face was pale, his steps slow, his breath heavy, but his eyes were alive. When the edge of the forest came into sight, his lips curled into a smile. He pushed forward, his body swayed, but he did not fall. The gates opened, and he staggered back into the arena. The crowd gasped. Some cried out in disbelief. Others shouted his name. They had expected him to be carried back in failure, but he had walked on his own. Lysera stepped forward, her heart pounding, her voice softer than it had ever been. "You survived," she whispered. "You proved it, human. You proved us all wrong." Daniel stood tall, though his body was broken, his voice low but steady. "Humans are not endless," he said, "but we endure beyond our limits. That is what makes us strong." The words rolled through the silent arena, and I sway. In that moment, even the proudest alien lowered their head. The dare was over. The human had won. The arena was silent. The human had returned from the wilderness, broken in body but alive in spirit. His clothes were torn, his skin marked with cuts, yet he stood tall before the alien crowd. Daniel's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. His hands shook, but his eyes were sharp. He looked across the faces before him, aliens who once mocked him, laughed at him, called him weak. Now those same faces showed something different. Respect. Lysera stepped into the center. Her silver blue skin glowed under the twin suns. Her crystal hair shimmered. She looked at Daniel with eyes that no longer carried only pride, but something softer, something harder for her to admit. She raised her voice for all to hear. The dare is complete. He survived every trial. He endured the night, the stone, the wilderness. He proved what I thought impossible. Humans are not weak. They are something else, something more. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some bowed their heads. A ripple spread through the people. For the first time, they looked at a human, not as prey, not as a fragile outsider, but as a warrior. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over him. He was not proud for himself. He was proud for his kind. He had shown them that humanity was more than soft skin and tired bones. Lysera stepped closer, her voice lowering so only he could hear. "Tell me, human," she asked. "What is it that gives you this strength? What drives you past the edge of breaking?" Daniel opened his eyes, his gaze locked on hers, his voice rough but steady. "It isn't about never breaking," he said. "It's about breaking and still moving forward. Humans don't stop because of pain. We don't stop because of fear. We endure because there is always something worth fighting for." Lysera's lips parted. She had no reply. His words struck her deeper than any blade. For her people, strength was about dominance, about never showing weakness. But for him, strength was something else entirely, something born from the heart. The crowd grew quiet again, listening to every word. Daniel turned to them, raising his voice just enough. "You asked if humans can be active all the time," he said. "No, we cannot. Our bodies rest, our bones tire, but our spirit does not rest when we are told we can't. That is when we rise." The silence that followed was heavy, powerful. Then slowly the aliens began to cheer, not mocking, not laughing, but cheering with respect. The sound rolled across the arena like thunder. Lysera stared at him, her chest tightened. She had started this as a game, a dare to mock a human. But now she felt something different entirely. She admired him, she respected him, perhaps even more than that. She whispered under her breath, "You changed me." Daniel turned his head toward her, his lips curled into a faint smile. "Maybe that was the point," he said. The horn sounded across the city, signaling the end of the trial. Daniel had won. The dare was over. But the lesson remained. From that day forward, the aliens would remember. Not endless strength, not endless stamina, but the truth of humanity. Spirit without limit. As the crowd dispersed, whispers filled the air. Some called him the Unbroken, others the Endurer. Titles given not for his body, but for his will. Lysera remained by his side, her sharp pride softened by something new. Daniel stood in the center of the arena, battered but unbowed. His voice whispered one last truth, carried by the wind. Humans may fall, but we always rise. And with that, the tale of the dare ended, but the legend of humanity had only begun.